The drive had taken longer than expected. Narrow country roads blurred beneath the steady rhythm of the rain, the windshield wipers clicking in hypnotic time. I hadn't seen another car for over an hour, and the deeper I went into the woods, the more the world behind me seemed to disappear. By the time I turned down the final gravel path, swallowed on both sides by overgrown trees and wet ferns, I could no longer tell how far I was from everything else. And I liked it that way. The headlights caught the shape of the old family cottage just as the road curved sharply left. A familiar outline against the pale blue-gray of evening. Sloped roof, low stone porch, shuttered windows all streaked with rain. The sight stirred something in me, soft like the edge of a half-memory. I pulled up close and sat for a moment with the engine ticking, watching the rain slide down the windshield, listening to its gentle patter on the roof. My fingers lingered on the steering wheel. I had come here to escape, to breathe, to forget. I stepped out into the rain without an umbrella. The air smelled of moss and pine and earth, wet and old. A fog clung low to the ground like a sleeping animal. The porch creaked under my weight. I pulled the rusted key from the chain around my neck, a key I hadn't touched in over a decade, and slipped it into the lock. The door opened with a long sigh, as if exhaling years of silence. Inside, the air was cool and still, and it carried the scent of old wood, dust, and something else, damp like forgotten places. I didn't bother with the lights right away. I let the dim gray light of dusk guide me through the front room. Nothing had changed. The low couch with the frayed quilt, the bookshelf tilted slightly to one side, the old oil painting of the river. Even the dent in the floorboard near the fireplace was still there, just where I remembered it. But something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just slightly tilted, like a painting hung a degree too far to the left. I tried not to linger on it. I told myself it was the years away, the distance between memory and reality. Places change when you're not looking. I dropped my bags by the stairs and walked slowly through the house. My footsteps were muffled by the thick old rug, and the rain murmured gently against the windows, constant like breath. I touched the edge of the dining table, ran my fingers along the cold surface of the fireplace stones. The house was waiting. It hadn't forgotten me, but I wasn't sure I remembered it properly. I climbed the narrow stairs to the second floor, each step groaning under my weight. The hall was darker, the windows small and fogged. 4 doors, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom. I opened the door to the room I used to sleep in as a child. The bed was made, the quilt neatly folded. Dust had settled on the windowsill, and a small spider hung motionless in the corner of the ceiling. I unpacked slowly, folded clothes into drawers that stuck slightly, just as they always had. I moved like I was underwater, each motion deliberate, each sound softened by the rain. Outside, the trees swayed in slow rhythm, shadows shifting gently across the walls. The house groaned once, deep and low. A settling sound, I told myself. Nothing more. As night fell, I made tea. The kitchen was cold, but I didn't mind. The smell of mint rose into the air as the kettle steamed. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, sipping from the old chipped mug my mother used to use. I didn't turn on the television. I just listened. The rain, the occasional crack of a branch outside, the whisper of the wind under the eaves. It was all oddly comforting, until I noticed it, the hallway, that stretch of shadow that led from the living room to the base of the stairs. I wasn't looking at it directly, just catching glimpses from the corner of my eye. It felt darker than the rest of the house, not just unlit but shadowed, heavy. Like something was there, standing just beyond the reach of the lamplight, not moving, just watching. I turned to look straight at it, and of course there was nothing. Just a narrow hallway, slightly warped from years of damp. But the feeling lingered, a pressure like air too thick to breathe. I wrapped the blanket tighter around myself and stared into my tea. I didn't look back again. Eventually, I made my way upstairs. The bedroom felt colder than before. I left the hallway light on, just in case. I slid under the quilt, the fabric stiff and cool against my skin. The rain was louder now, drumming gently on the roof, soothing in its rhythm. My thoughts drifted like mist. I tried to focus on the sound. Let it lull me, let it pull me away. But sleep did not come easy. When I finally slipped under, it was not into peace, but into something strange. I dreamed of the cottage, of walking barefoot across the floor, my steps echoing louder than they should. The lights flickered overhead, casting long, shifting shadows across the walls. I moved toward the kitchen, but the floorboards were soft, wet. I looked down. Water, rising slowly through the cracks. Cold, dark water creeping toward my ankles, then my knees. I tried to move, but the water tugged at me, heavy and slow, whispering in a language I almost understood. The sound of the rain was gone. Only the soft gurgle of rising water and the hollow echo of something moving beneath the surface. Then I woke. The room was still. The rain tapped gently against the window. My chest was tight, my limbs cold. I sat up slowly, listening. No water, no whispers, just the faint groan of the house shifting, settling. But I could still feel it, the weight of the dream clinging to my skin like damp clothes. I glanced toward the hallway. The light was off. I hadn't turned it off. I lay back down, eyes open, the ceiling above lost in shadow. I told myself it was just the breaker, or a faulty switch. The rain continued, soft and endless. A lullaby with too many verses. I closed my eyes again and let the darkness wrap around me, gentle as a tide. Waiting. The morning came gray and hushed. Rain still fell, gentle, persistent, the kind of rain that doesn't change pace but lingers like breath. I woke late, the air in the room cool and damp. The quilt smelled faintly of lavender and old cedar, a scent that reached far back into memory. For a moment I didn't move. I just listened to the rain whispering against the window and the occasional creak of the house settling into its bones. It felt like the kind of day meant for stillness. I rose slowly, letting the quilt slip from my shoulders, and padded barefoot across the wooden floor. My foot brushed against something soft, my bag half unpacked from the night before. I took my time dressing, my movements drawn out, careful. It felt wrong to move quickly in a place like this, as if speed might disturb something that had been sleeping here long before I returned. Downstairs, the house welcomed me in its quiet way. The kitchen smelled of damp wood and tea. I boiled water again, filling the silence with the soft hiss of steam and the clink of the spoon in the mug. Rain slid down the windows in narrow rivers, drawing crooked lines that distorted the trees outside. I watched for a while, sipping slowly. No bird song. No cars, just the steady rhythm of water. After breakfast, I decided to explore. Not in a deliberate way. More like the way you wander through a dream, curious but without urgency. I moved through the house slowly, room by room, letting my fingertips trace surfaces. The old banister, the edge of picture frames, the uneven corners of doorways. Each touch stirred something quiet inside me, like brushing dust from memories long forgotten. Most of the rooms were just as I remembered. The guest room still had the twin beds with the patchwork quilts. The small reading nook by the stairwell window still held a shelf of yellowed books and a chair with one wobbly leg. The bathroom was unchanged too, though the mirror had a bloom of condensation that refused to clear. But there was one door I didn't remember. It was at the end of the upstairs hallway, opposite the room where I slept. Narrow, painted the same pale gray as the rest, with a brass knob dulled by time. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, but when I reached for it, the knob wouldn't turn. What? I stood there for a moment, blinking. I tried the knob again, gently, as if that might change something, but it remained firm, unmoved. I knelt and looked at the keyhole. Old-fashioned. The kind that needed a skeleton key. I didn't recall ever seeing this door locked when I was young. In fact, I wasn't even sure I remembered the door being there at all. I told myself it must be a storage room. Every old house had one. Probably full of trunks and blankets, maybe broken furniture. Still, something about it felt off. Not in any obvious way. Just like it had been waiting. I moved away, but the door stayed with me. In the back of my mind, it pressed gently like the echo of a question. I tried to shrug it off. The rest of the day passed quietly. I read one of the old books from the hallway shelf, its pages brittle and brown at the edges. I curled up on the couch under a heavy blanket, the fire crackling low in the hearth even though it wasn't cold enough to need one. Outside, the rain continued without pause, a soft curtain drawn across the sky. Time felt thick, slow, unmeasured. As the light dimmed, the shadows inside the house grew longer. They moved gently along the walls, never quite still, never quite solid. I kept glancing toward the stairs. The thought of that locked door lingered. That night, I left the hallway light on again. I lay in bed, eyes half-lidded, listening to the soft lull of rain on the roof and the occasional distant rustle of trees swaying in the wet wind. The cottage breathed around me, wood groaning, windows sighing, floors creaking softly under their own weight. It was the kind of soundscape that should have brought comfort. But then I heard something else. Faint, barely audible. A slow, measured creak, then another. Not the erratic shifting of the house, but something more deliberate, like weight shifting back and forth step by step. From behind the locked door, I held my breath. The sound paused. I waited, unsure if I'd imagined it, unsure if maybe it had come from outside. Then, another creak. Closer this time. Still slow, still soft. Like footsteps, moving from one end of the room to the other, then stopping. Then starting again. I pushed the blanket aside and sat up, heart moving just a little faster now. I stepped into the hallway quietly, the wood cool beneath my feet. The door stood exactly as before. Still closed. Still locked. I approached slowly, the light casting a soft yellow halo along the floorboards. My hand reached out on its own, fingers hovering near the knob. I bent forward and placed my ear gently against the wood. Silence. No movement. No creaking. Nothing at all. But the air near the door felt different, thicker somehow. Not cold, not warm, just dense. As if the space beyond the door wasn't quite empty. I listened for a long time, eyes half closed, letting the soft rain in the background blend with the hush of the house. Then I turned away. I didn't try the knob again. I didn't knock. I just went back to my room, pulled the quilt up to my chin, and stared at the ceiling while shadows moved like water across the walls. My body lay still, but my mind wandered, circling the same thought. There shouldn't be a locked room. The sound didn't return that night. But even as sleep came, slow, fog, thick with images, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in the house. Like an eye opening in a room just out of sight. Not angry, not threatening, just aware, and waiting. The rain deepened the next morning, richer, more insistent, like a voice that had grown just a little more urgent overnight. I lay in bed longer than usual, eyes barely open, cocooned beneath the quilt as the world beyond the windows blurred into gray and silver. The sound of the rain wasn't harsh. It was steady, patient, endless. Like it didn't need to fall harder, it just needed to never stop. I had almost drifted off again when I heard it. A soft knock, then another. Not from the front door or the windows, but from within the house itself. Somewhere in the walls. At first I thought it was nothing. Maybe just old wood contracting in the damp. That made sense. It was a house built on 100 rainy nights like this one. But then it came again, 2 faint taps in quick succession, closer this time as if it had moved. I sat up slowly. The air felt thick with moisture. I could almost taste it. The walls, pale and cracked with age, looked unchanged. But I couldn't shake the feeling that the sound had followed me into waking. I got up and walked barefoot down the hallway, pausing by the locked door. No sound now. Just the hum of the rain and the occasional gust of wind pushing water harder against the house. Downstairs I made tea. The kettle's whistle seemed too loud, like a stranger shouting in a cathedral. Everything else in the cottage had become quiet. Not empty, just quiet. A kind of silence that listened. I settled into the old armchair in the parlor, a blanket across my knees and my book open but unread. I kept catching myself pausing mid-sentence, tilting my head slightly, listening. Tap, soft, deliberate, from the wall behind the fireplace. It was followed by a faint shuffle, like movement just behind the plaster. I stayed very still. The fire crackled gently beside me, oblivious. My tea grew cold in my hand. I told myself again it was just the house. Old houses make noise. Pipes shift. Nails creak. Beams move slightly as the walls breathe. It was easier to believe that than to accept what it felt like. Something searching, something gentle but aware. The knocking wasn't rhythmic. It wasn't random either. It had a kind of patience. Later I decided to record it. I didn't expect much. Maybe I needed to prove to myself that it wasn't real, that I'd been too long in silence, and the rain had filled the quiet with tricks. I placed my phone on the mantel and left it recording as I went about the rest of my day, folding the few clothes I'd brought, writing a letter I didn't send, staring out the window, watching the rain change shape as it slid down the glass. When I listened back, my breath caught. Static. Not the sound of the house. Not even ambient noise. Just soft, persistent static like the sea in the distance or a radio between stations. The knocking was gone. The tapping, the soft movements, they had vanished. As if they'd been meant only for me. Only for my ears. The static grew louder near the end of the recording. I leaned in, listening closely. There was a moment, just a breath, where I thought I heard something else. Not words exactly, but something beneath the noise. Like breath. Like something slow and close. Then silence again. I deleted the recording. That night, the rain grew heavier still. It struck the roof like a whisper with weight behind it. The sound filled the entire house, blanketing it, pressing in. I left the hallway light on again, though I didn't admit to myself why. In bed, I curled beneath the quilt and closed my eyes, willing my thoughts to quiet. Then the tapping began again. This time it started in the far corner of the room. A soft knock, barely audible but steady. Then another, closer. I held my breath, eyes closed. The sound moved. Tap, tap, from one wall to the next, like fingers tracing the shape of the room from within. I told myself not to look. Just stay still. Let it pass. But my heart had picked up its pace, quiet and deep in my chest, like a drum calling something I didn't mean to summon. The tapping came closer, and then, just as I felt myself drift on the edge of sleep, it stopped. Not because it had faded away, but because it had been waiting, like it needed me to almost fall asleep, as if sleep was a signal. I lay in silence, wide awake now. The rain kept falling, calm and endless, but the room felt frozen. The air didn't move. I listened so intently that my ears ached with it. But there was nothing. No knock. No tap. No breath from behind the walls. Only silence after something had paused. I don't know how long I stayed like that, half buried in the quilt, half holding myself still so nothing would hear. At some point, sleep found me. But it wasn't the soft kind. It came heavy and dark, like being pulled under the surface of still water. In the morning, the rain hadn't let up, and neither had the silence. The rain hadn't stopped all day. It never did really, not since I arrived. It just shifted in character. Sometimes it whispered against the windows as if it were trying not to disturb me. Other times it drummed slowly, rhythmically, like something vast breathing in time with the sky. This afternoon, it had taken on a contemplative tone, steady, reflective, coaxing me into a mood I hadn't felt in years. Quiet curiosity. I brewed tea and held the warm mug in my hands as I stood at the foot of the attic stairs. I hadn't been up there since I was a child. Back then, it had felt like a place full of secrets. Old trunks, dust-covered lampshades, forgotten Christmas decorations. My grandmother used to warn me not to spend too long there, though she never explained why. She would say it casually, but her voice would always tighten at the end. Just be quick if you go poking around up there. Today I felt strangely drawn to it. The steps creaked beneath me, slow and deep, as though they resented being disturbed. Each footfall stirred up a smell of dust and forgotten linen. At the top, the attic door groaned open under my hand, revealing the familiar slope of the ceiling and the dim light leaking through the one small, circular window. The air was colder up here, touched by damp. The kind of cold that didn't belong in the bones of a house, but lingered anyway. I wandered slowly through the attic, my fingers brushing across a wooden beam here, an old suitcase there. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, only letting the silence guide me, the tea cooling in my hands, the rain whispering just above my head. Near the far corner, something odd caught my eye. A patch in the floor, slightly raised. I knelt, setting my mug carefully to the side, and ran my fingers along the edge of the board. It moved under pressure, not much, but enough to tell me it was loose. I pried it up slowly, the wood protesting with a damp crackle. Beneath was a small wooden drawer, no bigger than a shoebox. It looked handmade, the kind of thing built long ago for some quiet, personal purpose. Inside the drawer was only one item, a photograph. I picked it up gently. It was old, the corners soft and curling. The image had faded over time, taking on that silvery ghost hue that seems to haunt memories more than preserve them. It was the cottage, unmistakably, but not as I'd ever seen it. It was winter in the photo, deep winter. The trees were bare, heavy snow coating the roof, the path buried under white. The sky above was pale and low, and yet everything felt sharper somehow, like a dream seen too clearly. There were two figures standing in front of the cottage. One of them was me. I knew it immediately. The coat, the stance, the way my head tilted slightly to the side. I must have been 10, maybe 11. I could see my breath curling in the air. I was smiling but not looking at the camera, looking at the person beside me. A woman. She stood just to my right, tall, wrapped in a dark coat. Her posture was familiar, protective. But her face was either blurred in the photo or had been scratched out deliberately. I leaned in, heart slowing slightly. It wasn't just a trick of light. Someone had taken a sharp object, perhaps a pin or a nail, and gouged the face again and again until only a void remained. Just beneath the image, in careful cursive, were two words: "Come home." I stared at the writing, my fingers trembling slightly now. There was no signature, no date, just that soft command or invitation or plea: "Come home." I sat there for a long time with the photograph in my lap. The rain continued above, steady and endless, like a hand stroking the roof. My tea had gone cold. I could smell the must of the attic mixing with the faint scent of cedar and age-old dust. I tried to remember the day in the photograph, but nothing came. I remembered other winters here, snowmen in the yard, boots by the fire, hot cocoa too sweet for adult taste. But not this, not that coat, not the woman, not even the feel of that heavy snowfall blanketing the world. I turned the photograph over again, but the message was the only clue: "Come home." The words lingered in my head as I descended the attic stairs. They echoed softly, like a whisper not meant for ears but for the deeper parts of the self. The kind of whisper you feel more than hear. Back downstairs, I placed the photo on the mantel, beside a small antique clock that had stopped at 3:17, though I couldn't remember when. I didn't want to look at it anymore, but I didn't want to hide it again either. It felt like it had come looking for me the way old memories do when you least expect them. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I kept glancing at the photograph without meaning to. There was something about the snow on the roof, something that hadn't registered at first. In the top right corner of the image, just above the attic window, there was a faint shape, a shadow, almost like a third figure half caught behind the glass, watching, but it was too faint to say for sure. A trick of age, a flaw in the development, maybe. Still, I placed the photo face down before going to bed, and when I closed my eyes, the image didn't leave me. I saw it behind my eyelids, the snow, the scratched-out face, and that quiet line of writing that now pulsed softly in the back of my mind. Come home. But I was already here. Wasn't I? It began with a pattern, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. I would wake in the dark, always at the same moment. Not with a start, not drenched in sweat or gripped by fear. Just awake. My eyes would open and the rain would be there, its gentle rhythm pressing softly against the windows, like fingers tapping glass. The clock beside the bed would glow its dim red numbers. 3:03 a.m. The first time I thought nothing of it. The second I felt a quiet unease, like brushing against a thought you didn't want to entertain. But the third and the fourth and the fifth, it became a presence in itself. The time, the hour, that strangely precise second of stillness. And then I noticed the light. The hallway outside my bedroom was always dark. I was careful with switches, especially in this old house where the bulbs buzzed and the wiring sometimes hummed in the walls. I liked the darkness. It softened everything, let the rain speak more clearly. But at 3:03 a.m., the hallway light would be on. Dim, flickering slightly. Not bright enough to flood the room, but enough to seep through the thin crack beneath the door, glowing like a breath held in a throat. I told myself it was a wiring issue, that the old house had its quirks, that perhaps I had brushed the switch earlier without knowing, but I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. On the sixth night, I left the bedroom door ajar just slightly, a finger's width. I lay in bed, the covers pulled up to my chest, and watched the hallway through that narrow slit. I didn't expect anything. I wasn't even sure what I hoped to see. But at exactly 3:03 a.m., the light came on. Not all at once. It pulsed like something exhaling into the bulb. A low hum followed. A soft buzz, distant yet oddly intimate, as though it came from just behind my eyes. The light flickered, casting long, stuttering shadows along the floorboards of the hallway. I watched, and then the shadows shifted. It was the faintest movement, so faint it might have been the house settling or the illusion of flickering light. But no, it was movement. Slow, deliberate, like someone walking silently beneath the bulb just out of sight. Their footsteps made no sound, but the light responded, swaying ever so gently, like reacting to weight or presence. I rose from bed, slowly, carefully. The air felt thick, the kind of stillness that makes you second-guess your own breath. I padded to the door, bare feet on cool floorboards. The crack in the door glowed faintly. I opened it. The hallway stretched before me, empty. But the light above flickered again, sharper this time. And for the briefest moment, just one heartbeat, the shadows seemed wrong. They stretched in odd directions. They didn't belong to the furniture. And at the far end of the hall, where the wallpaper peeled near the ceiling and the wooden floor dipped slightly, I thought I saw something. A shape. Human, perhaps. But not quite. It didn't move. It didn't breathe. But its presence pressed into the air like humidity before a storm. I stared, unblinking. My fingers curled around the edge of the doorway. The hallway was silent. Utterly silent. Even the rain seemed to pause outside as though waiting. I whispered, soft and careful, "Who's there?" The sound barely escaped my lips. It felt strange, speaking aloud in that moment, as if I were intruding on something sacred, something that didn't want to be disturbed. The hallway light flared, sudden and harsh. It buzzed, too loud for the quiet hour. My eyes watered from the brightness, from the heat of it. And then, just as quickly, it went out. Darkness. But not empty darkness. Darkness with weight. I stumbled backward into my room, heart thudding a little too fast. I closed the door gently, not slamming it, not drawing attention. I turned the lock with a trembling hand. A quiet click. Final. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Not out of terror, exactly, but out of a strange, aching sense of being seen. Watched. Not with malice, but with longing. Like something had been waiting a long time for someone to notice. The next night, I left the light switch taped down. At 3:03 a.m., the hallway was still dark, but I woke anyway. The same moment, the same awareness, and from the other side of the door, I thought I heard something shift against the floor. Just once. A drag of cloth. A sigh. A hush. I slept with the door locked after that. Not because I believed it would keep anything out, but because I needed the ritual, the act of drawing boundaries, the illusion of safety. The rain continued outside, never stopping. Always the same rhythm, like a lullaby that no longer soothed but mourned. The house creaked and breathed and whispered through its old bones. And every night I dreamed of the hallway, not how it looked, but how it felt. Endless, dark, glowing faintly with a light that never came from the ceiling. A hallway that was watching me back. The rain hadn't stopped for days. By now it felt less like weather and more like a state of being. A constant presence, soft and endless, washing over the roof and windows like the breath of something too large to see. It quieted the world, blurred the edges of thought. Every sound, every creak, every sigh of the old walls was softened by that endless whisper from the sky. I had fallen into a strange rhythm. Days passed in quiet rituals. Tea in the morning, long silences filled with the groan of settling beams, books left half-read by the fire. Nights were more uncertain. Drifting sleep, strange dreams, the hallway light that no longer dared to flicker. The atmosphere pressed gently on my chest, not heavy but insistent. It was during one of those rain-quiet afternoons, while aimlessly pacing, that I noticed something odd in the corner of the living room. An old rug, familiar, moth-eaten, the kind of thing no one thinks to lift. It bunched slightly in the middle, and when I stepped on it, the floor beneath felt different, hollow almost. I knelt, fingers brushing the damp, worn wool. The edges lifted easily. Underneath, the floorboards didn't quite match the rest of the room. The planks were newer, paler, and set unevenly, like someone had hurried the job, not expecting anyone to look too closely. I tapped gently. A dull echo answered. I stared at it for a moment, the hush of the rain behind me. Then I pulled at the edge of the boards. They shifted. With a low groan, one came loose, revealing a narrow cavity beneath. Dust and cobwebs curled at the corners, undisturbed for years. And tucked just inside, a shape, rectangular, wrapped in cloth that had yellowed with age and moisture. I pulled it out. It was a journal, small, the kind a child might carry in their backpack. Its leather cover was cracked, and the edges were swollen slightly from damp, but the binding had held. I opened it and froze. The handwriting was mine. Not mine now, but mine as a child. Rounded, uneven letters, some pressed too hard, others trailing off the page. The way I used to dot my I's with tiny open circles. The way I crossed my T's too low. I knew this writing, but I didn't remember ever keeping a journal like this. The first page was blank. The second held only a single sentence in heavy pencil. She waits behind the wall. Beneath it, the same line repeated over and over, each growing shakier, more frantic. Some were crossed out violently, others underlined twice. On the third page, "Don't look in the mirror at night." Then again in a smaller hand, "Don't look in the mirror at night. Don't look in the mirror at night." The words tangled across the page like a chant, like something meant to bind or ward or protect. And as I flipped through, the entries grew stranger. Short sentences, scribbled phrases, pages half erased. "The door won't open again." She spoke through the pipes. The eyes in the window weren't mine. The light lies. Some pages were torn. Others were smeared as if written in tears or rain. There were childlike drawings too, figures in shadow, vague outlines of the house with windows blacked out. One drawing showed a stick figure standing beside another with no face. Beneath it, in small writing, "She wears my shape." I read for hours, entranced, distantly unsettled. I didn't feel frightened exactly, just hollowed out in some quiet, internal way, like reading a story too close to the bone. Like finding evidence of something you'd once survived but couldn't remember. The last entry was only half a sentence, scrawled crookedly along the inside back cover. "If she gets out." It ended there. I held the journal in my lap, the rain tapping softly on the window beside me. My fingers had gone cold. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. I made tea. I lit a fire. I left the lights on. I told myself stories I didn't believe, but the silence in the walls had changed. It was no longer just old wood and wind. It listened. At some point, I caught myself standing in front of the mirror. I don't remember walking there. The hallway was dark behind me, and I stood facing the reflection. The glass was old, a little warped, speckled with age and dust. I looked tired. Well, but it was me. Except the eyes. Only for a moment. I blinked and everything was as it should be. But I locked the bathroom door that night, though I knew it wouldn't matter. The journal sat on my bedside table. I didn't open it again. The rain whispered at the window and I lay beneath the blankets, eyes open, listening. And at 3:03 a.m. something behind the wall knocked. The rain had become a constant presence now, not just in sound but in feeling. It softened everything. Blurred the air, the light, the edges of thought. The world outside had disappeared beneath a veil of mist and dripping branches, and even the birds had grown quiet. The earth was so soaked it no longer echoed with footsteps, only gave beneath them with a gentle, soundless yield. The silence was so deep it felt alive. Inside the house, I moved slower than usual, my limbs unsure as if the wet had seeped into my bones. Sleep came in fragments, light and uneasy. I would drift off only to wake again with a start, the sound of some remembered knock or whisper still ringing faintly in my ears. I had taken to lighting candles in the evening. The electricity worked fine, but the soft flicker felt more honest somehow. Closer to the mood that had settled over the cottage like a breath held just a little too long. That afternoon, as I passed the hallway near the old coat closet, something made me pause. Was the mirror. Just a small one, mounted in a wooden frame so weathered it had turned gray. I'd walked past it a dozen times since returning to the cottage, barely noticing it. But this time, something in the corner of my vision pulled me up short. There was someone behind me. I froze. In the mirror, the hallway stretched out as it should have. My own shape stood at the front, face pale in the low light. But behind me, near the far end where the shadows gathered, was another figure. Tall, facing me. Its outline was wrong, too narrow at the waist, the arms long, the face slightly out of focus, like a photograph taken with trembling hands. The head was tilted slightly to one side as though studying me. No detail, no eyes, but I felt them deep in the cold part of my spine. I turned. Nothing. Just the long, empty hallway. Coats hanging limply from their hooks. Shadows motionless, heavy. I turned back to the mirror. The figure was still there. For a moment, no more than a breath, it lingered. Then it faded. Not like a trick of the eye. Not like a shadow shifting or a play of light. It faded like steam on glass, like it had never belonged and had overstayed its welcome. I stared at my own reflection for a long time after that. My face, my eyes, watching myself watch myself. There was a waiting there, a wait. That night, I covered every mirror in the house. Some with towels, others with old sheets I found in the linen cupboard. Even the small one in the bathroom. I wrapped it tightly and taped the corners down. It felt childish, absurd, and utterly necessary. Like an instinct older than thought. Not fear exactly. Not yet. But something approaching it, soft-footed and patient. The rooms grew darker without the reflections, dimmer somehow. As though the mirrors had been letting in more than just light. But I slept better for a while. Or I tried to. The problem was the feeling. Even with the mirrors hidden, I still knew they were there. I could feel their gaze from behind the coverings. Like they remembered what they'd seen. Like the thing that had watched me from inside them had left something behind. Or perhaps hadn't left at all. In dreams, I wandered the hallway again and again, each time a little slower, a little quieter, trying not to wake the house. The mirrors in those dreams were uncovered, but I couldn't see myself in them. Just the rooms behind me. Empty. Until they weren't. Until something moved where I couldn't. I stopped using the hallway altogether. I found other routes through the house. shorter, awkward detours that made little sense but kept me away from the long wall of shadows where that mirror waited beneath its shroud. I kept the lights on, though they flickered sometimes, and made sure the doors were always locked, though I couldn't say what I was locking out. The rain continued. If anything, it grew heavier. At times I thought I heard footsteps just beyond the window, soft and slow, pacing in time with mine. But when I looked, there was nothing. Only the garden soaked in silver mist. The trees bowed beneath the weight of water, unmoving. One evening, I dared to uncover the mirror just enough to peek. I don't know why. It wasn't bravery. More like a compulsion. Like an itch in the mind. A voice that said just once, just to check, just a glance. I lifted the cloth slowly, my fingers trembling. My own face looked back. Familiar. Well, so. But the hallway behind me was different. The coats were gone. The wallpaper had peeled. And the floor where I stood was black with water, rippling gently around my ankles. I blinked. The mirror was normal again. I replaced the covering without a word and left the hallway behind. That night, the rain grew louder, hammering on the windows like it wanted to come in. I pressed a chair against my bedroom door and slept with my back to the wall. And in the deepest part of sleep, I dreamed of reflections peeling away from glass, stepping out quietly, dripping water onto old wood, smiling without mouths. In the morning, the towels had slipped from two of the mirrors, only a little, just enough to see a sliver of what watched behind the glass. The urge to open that locked door gnawed at me relentlessly, a quiet pulse beneath the surface of my thoughts. Days had passed since I first found it, a plain wooden door, unremarkable except for the stubborn lock that barred me from whatever lay beyond. I told myself it was just a storage room or maybe a relic of childhood, a forgotten space I had no right or need to enter. But the house felt smaller with it closed, a secret humming in the silence that wouldn't be ignored. One evening, after the rain had softened into a gentle drizzle, I found an old hairpin in the bathroom drawer. It wasn't much, but my fingers were patient, and my breath slow as I knelt before the door. The lock clicked open with a whisper, as if reluctant to reveal what it held inside. The air that spilled out was cool and clean, untouched by dust or age. Stepping through the threshold, I blinked as my eyes adjusted. The room was pristine, an impossible bubble of stillness amid the slow decay of the rest of the house. It was exactly as I had imagined, except it was so much more. The wallpaper was pale blue with tiny white stars, like a forgotten dreamscape. Soft, scattered light filtered through a lace curtain, catching motes of dust that floated lazily in the air. The wooden floor was polished smooth, no creaks or stains to betray the years. It smelled faintly of lavender and old paper, a scent I hadn't realized I missed so deeply. In one corner, a small rocking chair sat unmoved. Beside it, a low bookshelf held a collection of worn books, their titles faded but their pages soft and familiar. Toys were scattered carefully on a quilted rug, wooden blocks with peeling paint, a delicate porcelain doll with glass eyes that seemed to watch quietly, and an old tin train, its wheels rusted but whole. There was a stillness here that felt sacred, as if the room had been waiting for me to return. On the bed lay a small stuffed fox, threadbare from years of loving hands. Its button eyes were cloudy, the seams frayed, but it held a quiet dignity, like a guardian of forgotten memories. I reached out and picked it up, feeling the softness of the fabric and the slight give of the stuffing beneath my fingers. The fox seemed to hum with some unspoken familiarity, a silent companion to a past I couldn't quite grasp. Above the bed, hanging crooked on the wall, was a painting. It was the cottage, painted in winter's hush beneath thick blankets of snow. The colors were muted, whites and grays melting into pale blues. But this time the woman beside me was different. Her face was clear, sharp and real, eyes that held a kind of sorrowful welcome. She looked as if she might step out of the frame at any moment, but her lips remained sealed. I stared at the painting, heart tightening with a strange ache. Recognition stirred deep inside me. I knew her. Somehow I knew her. A whisper drifted through the room. Soft, breathy, carried on the faintest currents of air. My name. I turned slowly, breath catching, but the room remained empty. No mouth moved. No shadow shifted. Yet the voice was there, just beyond hearing, just beyond seeing. Said my name again. I sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the fox close. My fingers trembled slightly, and the room seemed to lean in, the silence swelling like a wave about to break. The painting caught the dim light, and I could swear the woman's eyes followed me, steady and knowing. For a long moment, I felt less alone than I had in days, yet somehow more fragile. As if the room held a breath it wouldn't release, a secret pressed between walls and memories and quiet whispers. I didn't want to leave, but I also didn't want to stay. Outside, the rain fell softly, its steady rhythm a slow heartbeat in the darkening evening. I stood and closed the door gently behind me, locking it once more. But the fox stayed with me, a worn sentinel in my hands. And in the hush of that night, I dreamed of the woman in the painting. Her face clear now, her lips moving, calling softly, but never quite saying what I longed to hear. The moment the door closed behind me, a weight shifted deep inside. The house seemed to exhale, as if the walls themselves had been holding their breath, waiting for something I hadn't yet been ready to face. The rain outside softened into a gentle murmur, a quiet lullaby that seeped through the window panes and wrapped itself around the room like a familiar shawl. I sat on the edge of the bed, the worn fox cradled in my lap, and for the first time, the silence inside me began to dissolve. It was in the hush that the memory came rushing back, slow and steady, like the tide washing over smooth stones. I had lived here, not just visited but truly lived, and I wasn't alone. There was her, the sister whose name had always hovered at the edge of my thoughts, like a half-remembered dream, a forgotten song. Her laughter echoed faintly now, carried in the rain's soft tapping against the glass. I could feel her presence, not as a ghost, but as something tender and real, woven into the very fabric of the house. She had been here, right here. I remembered the long summer days when the sun stretched lazily across the sky, painting the fields golden. We had run through the tall grass, chasing each other's shadows, our voices light and free. But there was a well behind the cottage, hidden by thick ivy and wildflowers, a quiet, dark place I had tried not to see. She fell into it one day. The water had swallowed her with a silence so complete it drowned out everything else. I had buried the memory deep, so deep that when I left this place years ago, I had thought I'd left it behind entirely. But the rain hadn't stopped. It had followed me like a shadow, like a morning song. I realized then that I hadn't come home just to hide from the noise of the world. I had come to grieve. The room around me felt alive in a way I hadn't expected. The walls breathed with stories long told but never quite finished. The floor beneath my feet hummed with the weight of years, of quiet sorrows and whispered forgiveness. I ran my fingers over the surface of the fox, its fabric soft and worn, like the skin of something cherished too much. It was a small piece of her, a fragment of the past that refused to fade. I closed my eyes and let the memory settle, heavy and kind. I saw her face, bright with mischief, framed by sunlight and tangled hair. I heard her voice, a soft melody carried on the wind. The house held us both now, me trying to remember and her waiting for me to see. Outside, the rain kept falling, steady and gentle, as if the sky itself was offering a slow, patient forgiveness. I didn't rush to escape the room or silence the memories that rose like mist. Instead, I let them wash over me, the sorrow and the love intertwined like roots beneath the earth. For the first time since I arrived, I felt a quiet peace in the darkness. The house was no longer just a place of shadows and whispers. It was a home that held our story, a story I was finally ready to remember. That final night stretched out like a soft sigh, the rain outside easing into a gentle murmur, almost warm against the window panes. The house itself seemed to hold its breath in a way that felt different, lighter, as if a long weight had finally been lifted. I moved slowly, deliberately, savoring the quiet that had settled deep into the corners and crept along the wooden beams overhead. With careful hands, I pushed open the windows, letting the cool, fresh air drift in, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and moss, the smell of rain-washed leaves. Tiny droplets kissed the wooden floorboards, tracing delicate patterns that gleamed softly in the muted light. The sound of the rain softened into a tender rhythm, like a lullaby woven from the breath of the earth itself. I wandered through the rooms, each one carrying its own whisper of memory, a flicker of the past softened by time and the gentle night. The hall, once a place of strange lights and flickering shadows, now seemed to glow with something warm and calm. I paused there, my fingers lightly brushing the wall, feeling the pulse of the house beneath the paint and plaster, steady and slow. I whispered good night, not to the empty rooms or silent walls, but to the presence that had lingered so long, the quiet watcher who had kept me company in the darkness. I spoke to the hall, to the unopened room, to the mirrors I had covered and the reflections that still felt alive in the corners of my mind. The words came softly, a thread of sound weaving through the stillness. Good night to the house, to the rain, to the memory that had finally found its place. Good night to her, the sister I had remembered, the shadow who had waited patiently beneath the surface of my thoughts. When I settled back into bed, the warmth of the night wrapped around me like a gentle shawl. The house exhaled a quiet sigh, and for the first time since I arrived, I felt a deep, steady peace. The rain faded completely, leaving behind only the soft, lingering scent of damp earth and the faint echo of whispered names. I drifted slowly into sleep, the steady rhythm of my breath matching the calm pulse of the house. When morning came, the sky was clear, the air fresh and bright. The rain had stopped completely, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. The house felt empty now, still and peaceful, as if it had finally slept after all these years. But I knew, deep in my bones, that she had heard me, that the whispers and shadows were no longer waiting but resting too. The house had finally found its quiet, and so had I. The road stretched before me, slick and shining in the soft, dim light of early evening, the sky heavy with thick clouds that had already begun to weep. There was a quietness in the air that felt almost sacred, the kind of stillness that falls just before the world closes its eyes for the night. The rain started as a gentle tap, each drop landing like a soft finger on the roof of the car, then falling heavier as I approached the edge of the forest where the old family home waited. I remember the smell first, that deep, rich scent of damp earth and moss, the way the trees seemed to breathe in the moisture, filling the air with something ancient and forgotten. It felt as though the forest itself was exhaling, sighing quietly beneath the weight of the rain. My footsteps were muffled as I crossed the gravel driveway, the loose stones wet and dark underfoot. The rain had started to fall steadily now, a slow, rhythmic tapping that settled into a soothing pattern. I pulled my coat tighter around me, the fabric still warm from the car's heater, and felt the cool droplets gathering on my hair and skin. The chill was not unpleasant. It was the kind of cold that makes you feel alive, awake in a way that the busy noise of the world never allows. It wrapped around me, a quiet invitation to pause and listen. The house came into view, dim and softened by the curtain of rain. It looked smaller than I remembered, as if the years had folded it inward, pressing the edges closer together. The wood was worn and weathered, the paint peeling faintly at the corners of the windows, and the roof sagged just a little where moss had taken root. The old porch light flickered weakly, casting long, trembling shadows across the wet stones beneath. It was the kind of place that felt like a secret, something held close to the earth, hidden from the loud, rushing world beyond the trees. I reached for the rusted key that hung on a thin leather cord around my neck, cold and smooth in my hand. The metal was worn, the grooves softened by years of use, but it still fit the lock perfectly. I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep inside me before sliding the key into the door. The lock gave a faint click and the door creaked open with a slow, deliberate groan that echoed softly in the quiet. The scent of the house washed over me immediately, a mingling of old wood, dust, and something faintly sweet, like dried lavender left too long in the sun. Stepping inside felt like stepping into a dream, familiar but just slightly out of reach. The floorboards beneath my feet creaked with age, each step sending a small echo drifting down the long hallway. The walls seemed to hold their breath, the faded wallpaper peeling gently in the corners where the damp had settled. Light from the overcast sky filtered through the windows, casting soft, muted patterns across the furniture covered in white sheets. Everything was exactly as it had been, and yet nothing felt quite right, like a memory where some details had blurred, the edges slipping away into shadow. I moved slowly through the house, my fingers brushing against the rough wood of the banister, the cool glass of the window pane, the cracked surface of the old porcelain sink in the kitchen. Each room whispered its own quiet story, the air thick with the weight of time and absence. Outside, the rain fell steadily, a gentle curtain of sound that wrapped around the house and settled in the silence like a lullaby. It filled the spaces between memories, some bright and clear, others faint and blurred, until they softened into something more like feeling than thought. I unpacked my bag with slow, careful movements, laying out the few things I'd brought with me: a worn notebook, a sweater folded neatly, a small candle that smelled faintly of pine. The rain's steady patter was a constant presence, sliding down the glass, tapping on the roof, pooling quietly in the gutters. It was a sound that both comforted and unsettled me, like the heartbeat of the house itself, slow and rhythmic, steady enough to trust but strange enough to listen closely. I found myself drawn to the windows, watching the water trace its path down the glass, blurring the world beyond into a wash of gray and green. There was a stillness inside the house that felt alive, as if the shadows themselves had weight, as if the corners held secrets just beyond the edge of sight. I caught myself glancing toward the hallway, where the darkness seemed to deepen, growing thick and soft like velvet. Something felt as if it was watching, not with eyes but with presence, waiting quietly in the spaces between light and shadow. It was not frightening in a sharp, sudden way, but rather a gentle, persistent feeling that something was just beyond reach, watching patiently. As the evening stretched on, the rain became a steady companion. I lit the candle, its warm glow flickering against the walls and casting soft, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe with the quiet. The house settled around me, creaking softly in response to the night's cool breath. I sat by the window with my notebook, tracing the faint outlines of words that wouldn't quite come, the rain's steady rhythm guiding my thoughts toward a gentle calm. When I finally lay down to sleep, the house seemed to hold its breath with me, the rain's lullaby a steady pulse against the windows. My mind drifted lazily, slipping between moments of memory and dream. I found myself standing beneath the floorboards, water rising slowly around my feet, cool and clear. Shadows moved beneath the surface, slow and indistinct, as if the house itself was breathing beneath me. I felt the weight of water pressing gently against the wood, a quiet presence waiting just out of sight. Sleep came in soft waves, pulled down by the steady falling rain and the house's whispered secrets. And even as I drifted, the feeling lingered, that this place was alive in ways I had forgotten, that the rain was not just falling but calling. Outside, the world was hushed and wet, the trees heavy with water, and inside I was home once more, held gently in the quiet embrace of the rain. The morning light filtered softly through the rain-spattered windows, casting a muted glow over the worn wooden floors and the faded walls of the house. Outside, the steady drizzle continued, a gentle rhythm that seemed to pulse with the very heartbeat of the place. I rose slowly, wrapped in the quiet calm of the day, the sound of rain a steady hum that filled every corner. As I moved through the rooms, tracing the familiar shapes of furniture covered in dust and sheets, my footsteps echoed softly, swallowed by the thick, damp air. There was a stillness here, one that pressed gently against my skin, as if the house itself was holding its breath. And then, as I turned a corner into the long hallway, I saw it. A door I didn't remember. It stood there, unmoving and unyielding, its surface worn but smooth, the faded paint chipped near the edges. The lock was old, rusted perhaps, but firmly in place. I pressed my hand against the cool wood and felt a strange tightening in my chest, a flutter of unease that I couldn't quite name. It was as if the door was a boundary, something meant to remain closed, a secret locked away and waiting. For a long while I stood there, staring at it, wondering why it had escaped my memory or if it had always been there, just waiting for me to find it now. The rain outside fell steadily, a soft backdrop to the quiet tension that grew around that door. I wanted to turn away, to leave it alone and find comfort in the more familiar parts of the house, but something drew me back again and again. The door held a mystery that settled like a weight in my mind. I spent the day tucked in the living room, the windows fogged by the damp air, the rain steady tapping a gentle companion. I read from a book I'd brought, the pages soft and worn, but my attention kept drifting back to the locked door. The room was quiet except for the sound of rain and the faint creaks of the house settling deeper into itself. Shadows lengthened with the afternoon light, stretching and shifting like slow-moving waves. Night came wrapped in a cloak of mist and rain, the house growing colder and more still. I lay in bed, the sheets cool against my skin, the soft drip of water from the gutters blending with the slow creaks that seemed to come from every corner of the house. But beneath all the familiar sounds was something else, a quiet rhythm, a series of soft footsteps that echoed faintly from the direction of the locked door. They were slow, deliberate, measured, like someone walking just beyond the veil of sleep. I held my breath, straining to listen. The steps would pause, the creaks would settle into silence, and then the footsteps would start again, slow and steady, moving back and forth behind the barrier of wood and rusted metal. It was as if the door itself was alive, breathing softly in the dark, holding its own secrets close. When the sound stopped, I pressed my ear gently to the cold surface, hoping to catch even the faintest whisper. But as soon as my skin touched the door, the footsteps vanished, swallowed by the night. The silence that followed was thick and heavy, filled with the feeling of waiting, patient and watchful. I pulled back, my heart fluttering in the quiet room. The rain continued its steady lullaby, but behind that door, something was waiting, something just out of reach. I lay back in bed, the locked door etched deep in my mind, its presence a soft, unsettling pulse beneath the calm. The house breathed around me, filled with the slow rhythm of rain and shadow, and I felt the quiet weight of a secret still held tight, waiting to be discovered. The rain outside had thickened into a steady, drumming chorus by afternoon, its soft, relentless rhythm pressing gently against the windows like a lullaby sung in slow waves. The air inside was cool and heavy with dampness, the scent of wet earth slipping in through the cracks around the window frames. I sat quietly in the living room, the fading light casting long shadows that moved with the rain, and I tried to lose myself in the pages of a book. But the stillness around me was uneasy, punctuated by a subtle, almost imperceptible tapping coming from within the walls themselves. At first, I thought it was nothing more than the house settling, old wood contracting and expanding with the damp, or perhaps the plumbing adjusting to the chill of the rain-soaked evening. The sound was faint, a soft knocking that seemed to drift slowly from one room to another, like a wandering echo carried on the breath of the house. I could almost convince myself it was the wind trapped behind the walls, whispering secrets in a language I couldn't quite understand. But the rhythm was too steady, too deliberate to be random. The taps came in measured beats, a gentle pattern that circled through the rooms with quiet persistence. Sometimes it felt almost like a knock, a signal. Sometimes like a slow, tender pulse, like someone trying to say something without breaking the silence. I found myself leaning in closer, pressing my ear against the cold plaster, trying to catch the message hidden beneath the wood and paint. With the rain falling harder, the tapping became a quiet companion, moving like a ghostly rhythm through the house. It slipped beneath the hum of the storm, riding the steady flow of water, growing more persistent as the evening deepened. I pulled my chair closer to the wall and reached for my phone, hoping to capture the sound in a recording, something to prove it was real, something beyond the haze of my imagination. But when I played back the recording, the faint tapping was gone. Only silence, punctuated by static, answered me. It was as if the sound belonged only to the house, to this moment, to the space between waking and sleep. The recording device was blind to it, deaf to the gentle knocks and subtle rhythms that stirred the air. I pressed play again, then again, each time hoping to hear the tapping, but it remained elusive, slipping through my fingers like mist. That night, as I lay in bed with the rain drumming a steady cadence on the roof, the tapping slowed and softened until it faded completely. Just as I began to drift, the silence settled deep, pressing against my eyelids like a quiet invitation. It was in that silence, just before sleep claimed me, that I felt the house exhale, a breath held for so long, now released with gentle patience. It was as though something was waiting for me to surrender to the quiet, to close my eyes, to slip beyond the threshold of wakefulness. The tapping ceased at the moment I let go, folding into the dark folds of the night like a lullaby ending in a whisper. The rain's rhythm remained, a soft heartbeat outside my window, steady and calm. But inside the house, the walls seemed to pulse with the memory of that sound, a secret kept just beyond reach. I lay still, wrapped in the deep quiet of the room, the air thick with anticipation. The night stretched long and slow, carrying me gently toward sleep, while the house held its breath with me. And somewhere in the silence, beyond the edge of dreams, I could feel the waiting, patient, persistent, and unbroken. The afternoon light was muted, filtered softly through thick, rain-soaked clouds, casting a gentle gray glow across the worn wooden floorboards. The house seemed to breathe quietly around me, wrapped in a cocoon of damp stillness and the rhythmic tapping of rain against the windows. I wandered slowly from room to room, my footsteps soft against the creaking floor, drawn by an unshakable urge to explore the forgotten corners I had never fully noticed before. In the far corner of the attic, where dust motes floated lazily in the faint light, my fingers brushed against something unusual, a floorboard that felt just slightly loose beneath my touch. The wood shifted gently under my palm, revealing a narrow gap, a secret hidden beneath years of neglect. Heart slowing with a strange mixture of curiosity and caution, I knelt down and carefully pried the board up, revealing a small wooden drawer tucked away like a whispered secret. The drawer was old, its surface worn and faded with time, smelling faintly of must and forgotten memories. I slid it open slowly, half expecting it to be empty, but inside lay a single object, a photograph curled at the edges and yellowed with age. I lifted it out with care, the paper fragile between my fingers, and stared at the image, feeling a shiver that had nothing to do with the chilly air. It was the house, coated in thick, heavy snow, the kind that muffles sound and softens edges. The roof sagged slightly under the weight of winter, and the bare trees around stood like silent sentinels in the pale light. But what struck me most was that I was in the photograph. Not as a distant figure, but close, standing near the front porch, my face young and unfamiliar. The winter coat I wore in the photo wasn't one I remembered owning, nor was the day frozen in my memory. Beside me stood a woman, her shape clear but her face blurred, as if someone had deliberately scratched the surface to erase her features. The blurred face seemed to shift slightly when I looked away and back again, like a ghost hiding just beyond the limits of vision. My breath caught, a quiet ache settling deep in my chest, the weight of something unspoken pressing into the space between us. I turned the photograph over carefully, fingers trembling as I searched the back for clues. There, scrawled in faded ink, was a single phrase, short, stark, and haunting in its simplicity: "Come home." The words seemed to pulse softly in the quiet air, echoing in the small attic space like a whispered invitation or a plea. I held the photograph close, the paper cool against my palm, and the rain outside continued its steady song. The house felt suddenly larger, filled with shadows that seemed to stretch and breathe with the fading light. I traced the blurred face with my finger, feeling a strange connection to the unknown woman, as if a thread had been pulled tight between us, woven from forgotten moments and lost years. Sitting back against the attic wall, I allowed the silence to settle around me. The rain softened, tapping a slower rhythm, and the weight of the photograph in my hand felt like a tether, anchoring me to something buried beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. The woman's blurred face seemed to hover at the edges of my vision, a presence both distant and intimate, as if she was watching from just beyond the veil of memory. I thought about the phrase on the back, "Come home." Was it a warning? A hope? A summons from a past I had shut away? The snow in the photograph muffled everything, including sound, time, and perhaps the truth. And yet here I was, back in this house, drawn by something I could not name, caught between the pull of what was lost and the quiet promise of discovery. The house creaked gently, the floorboards sighing beneath the rain's embrace, and I felt, more clearly than ever, that I was not alone. Something lived in the shadows of this place, something patient, something waiting. I tucked the photograph carefully into my coat pocket and rose, my steps slow as I made my way back down the attic stairs. Outside, the rain continued its steady fall, a quiet companion to the secrets hidden deep within the walls. I could still feel the weight of the photograph's message, a soft echo calling me forward, urging me deeper into the silence of the house and the memories it held tightly beneath its skin. The house has settled into a rhythm now, one that follows the steady beat of the rain outside and the slow, shifting shadows within. Each day melts softly into night, and the hours stretch thin and quiet as the world outside slips into sleep. It is in these quiet, suspended moments that I have begun to notice something strange, something that feels less like a coincidence and more like a secret whispered directly to me by the house itself. It always begins at the same time, 3:03 a.m. precise, like the ticking of an old clock. That moment arrives with a subtle shift in the air. I lie awake, muscles heavy and warm beneath the blankets, when the faintest light starts to pulse from the hallway just outside my bedroom door. It is pale and wavering, like the gentle flame of a candle flickering in the slightest breath of wind. But I know I never switch on that light, not once since I returned to the house. There is a softness to the glow, something fragile and tentative, as if the light itself is hesitant to reveal too much. Sometimes it dances like a shy guest lingering at the edge of a room. Other times it steadies, glowing steady and almost alive. I watch from the threshold of my bed, eyes heavy but wide, heart slowing into a quiet, watchful stillness. The rain outside continues its steady, hypnotic rhythm, soft drumming on the windows and roof, a steady lullaby that both soothes and unsettles. I feel it then, as if the light is not just a flicker of electricity but a signal, a quiet breath in the darkness, something reaching out just beyond my sight. It's a presence moving slowly through the space where shadows gather and retreat. I cannot see it exactly, it remains just beyond the edge of the light's fragile glow, a subtle shift in the darkness that prickles the back of my neck. My breath becomes shallow, careful, held in a delicate balance between curiosity and caution. One night, with the rain soft and steady around me, I slip from bed and step into the hallway. The wooden floor beneath my bare feet creaks softly, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the rain's persistent murmur. The hallway stretches long and narrow, walls lined with peeling wallpaper that seems to absorb the dim light and scatter it in fragmented patterns. The pale glow flickers above, bathing the space in a fragile, trembling warmth. I stand there, barely daring to breathe and whisper, just a soft breath of sound, "Who's there?" For a moment, there is nothing but the gentle hiss of rain and the faint flickering of the light. Then, as if in answer, the glow brightens suddenly, flaring like a brief flame caught in a sudden gust. It is quick, barely more than a heartbeat, but enough to flood the hallway with a warm, fleeting brightness that feels almost like a glance, a presence acknowledging my voice, responding in kind. And just as suddenly the light dies. The hallway is plunged into darkness, deep and complete, save for the restless shadows pooling in the corners. I stand frozen, pulse quickening in the stillness, the silence stretching long and waiting. After that night, I do something I had never thought I would. I lock my bedroom door. It's a small barrier, fragile and thin, but it feels necessary against the quiet unknown that stirs in the hall. Still, even with the lock in place, I find myself drawn to the door, compelled to peer through the gap beneath it or listen for the faintest sign of movement beyond. The light returns each night at the same moment, 3:03 a.m., a gentle, beckoning glow that pulses with a rhythm all its own. Sometimes it flickers with an almost playful dance. Other times it steadies, like a heartbeat in the quiet. And always, I feel that presence lingering just beyond the reach of the light, watching, waiting. I am both afraid and comforted by it, the strange companion in the darkness, the silent watcher in the hallway. Its presence is neither harsh nor threatening. Rather, it feels patient, as if it's been here all along, quietly waiting for me to notice, to speak, to acknowledge its existence. And so I watch, whispering softly in the dark, the rain a steady, soothing song outside my window. The light flickers and fades, the house breathes around me, and somewhere just beyond sight, a presence lingers, silent, gentle, and waiting. The morning light filters softly through the curtains, pale and muted by the steady rain that has become a constant companion. The house feels heavier today, quieter, as if it's holding its breath beneath the gentle gray sky. I'm moving slowly, my steps careful on the old wooden floorboards, as I shift a faded rug that has long settled in its place like a forgotten memory. The rug's edges are frayed, its colors dulled by years of neglect, but as I pull it back, something unexpected catches my eye. The floor beneath reveals a series of loose boards, one slightly more unsettled than the others, as if waiting to be discovered. My fingers hesitate for a moment before I press down, feeling the subtle give beneath the wood. Slowly the board lifts, creaking softly like a whispered secret breaking free. Beneath it lies a shallow compartment, tucked away from sight for who knows how long. Inside, wrapped in a delicate, faded cloth, rests a small journal. The cover is worn, edges softened and pages yellowed with age. My breath catches. This is no ordinary find. I lift it carefully, the weight of it somehow heavier than the paper should allow. The handwriting inside is unmistakably mine, but it's from a time that feels distant, like a dream slipping away before the morning light. The letters are small and trembling, hurried in places, as if penned in moments of urgent fear or confusion. I turn the pages slowly, each word sinking deep into the quiet room. The entries are fragmented, filled with cryptic warnings and fleeting memories. She waits behind the walls. One line reads, the words curling into the margins like tendrils of shadow. Another pleads softly, never look in the mirror at night. The handwriting shifts from calm to frantic, the ink smudged as if the writer's hand had trembled in dread. I trace the words with my fingertips, feeling the weight of something unseen pressing against the paper. The house around me seems to listen, the rain outside murmuring like a steady heartbeat, slow and insistent. The atmosphere thickens, as if the very air carries the residue of those forgotten moments, whispering secrets just beyond reach. As evening falls, the shadows stretch longer, folding into the corners and beneath the furniture. I find myself unable to close the journal, drawn deeper into its pages, each sentence a thread weaving me into a story I had buried beneath years of silence. The warnings echo in my mind, quiet yet persistent. When night finally settles, I try to find rest, but sleep evades me. The room feels charged, alive with a subtle presence that moves just beyond the edge of perception. The rain taps a steady rhythm against the windows, a soft drumming that blends with faint whispers curling through the walls. I lie still, breath shallow, eyes wide in the dark. The journal's words linger in the silence. She waits behind the walls, a chilling refrain that pulses in time with the rain. I reach out for the light, but the darkness feels too thick, too alive, as if it holds me gently yet firmly in its grasp. The mirror across the room reflects nothing but shadow, and I find myself unable to look, the warning etched deep within. Time blurs as the rain continues its endless song, wrapping the house in a cloak of muted sound. Sleep remains just beyond my reach, slipping away like water through fingers. And somewhere just behind the walls I sense the waiting, patient, silent, and eternal. The house feels cloaked in a heavy quiet, the rain outside still falling, soft and steady, as if it has no intention of ever stopping. I move slowly through the narrow hallway, the worn floor creaking faintly beneath my feet. The air is thick with the scent of damp wood and old memories, the kind that settle into the corners and never quite leave. My eyes catch the glass of a tall mirror standing at the end of the hall, its surface dim and slightly dusty, reflecting the muted light of the overcast evening. As I pass, a flicker of movement in the mirror pulls my attention. My breath catches, slow and shallow, as I see something standing behind me, tall, unmoving. The figure's outline is hazy, but unmistakably there. Feels raw. Its form stretches just a little too tall, too still, and its face distorts in ways I can't quite describe. Features twisted, blurred as if caught between moments or realities. I can't make sense of it, but the sensation settles deep in my chest, a quiet unease that refuses to fade. I spin around quickly, heart thumping in soft, uneven beats, but there is nothing. The hallway behind me is empty, just the faded wallpaper, the closed doors, the faint echo of the rain's rhythm outside. No sign of the figure, no shadow to explain it. I glance back at the mirror, expecting the reflection to show only the empty hall, but it lingers a moment longer, the distorted shape wavering just beyond the edges of clarity. It holds my gaze, unmoving and silent, before slowly fading away like mist dissolving in morning light. I blink, trying to steady my breath, the slow thrum of rain outside suddenly feeling sharper, more insistent. The mirror now shows only my own tired face, pale and drawn in the dimness. But I know what I saw, a glimpse of something that should not be, something caught between worlds watching. For the first time since arriving, a wave of cold settles over me, not the chill of the damp air or the evening rain, but something deeper. It seeps beneath my skin, an invisible weight pressing softly on my chest. I run my fingers along the edge of the mirror, tracing the frame's carved woodwork, feeling the rough grain beneath my skin, grounding myself in the here and now. But the feeling of being watched lingers, a quiet presence folded into the air around me. That night, sleep feels more fragile. I move through the house, covering every mirror I find, the tall one in the hallway, the small one above the bathroom sink, the cracked frame in the guest room. I drape sheets and old cloths over the glass, as if the fabric could hold back the unseen eyes that seem to dwell just behind the surfaces. The mirrors feel like doorways, thin veils between what is and what lingers unseen. Even after covering them, I can't shake the sensation of being watched, a quiet gaze brushing over my skin like a breeze that isn't there. I lie awake in the darkness, the steady rhythm of the rain outside a soft lullaby that both soothes and unsettles. Every time I close my eyes, I feel those eyes still searching for me through the glass, patient and silent. Time stretches slowly, the shadows deepening in the corners of the room, the quiet breathing of the house syncing with my own. The memory of that distorted face lingers like a half-remembered dream, vague and haunting, refusing to be dismissed. And in the faintest glimmers of sleep, I hear the gentle tapping of nails against glass, so soft I'm never quite sure if it's real or imagined. The house, the rain, the reflections, they are all pieces of something I don't yet understand. But I know the mirrors hold more than just my image. Something waits there, unseen but present, watching and waiting, as endless and patient as the rain itself. The door stood before me all day, closed, silent, and locked. It was an unyielding barrier in the middle of the familiar walls, a space I had never noticed before, or perhaps had always avoided. The rain fell steadily outside, the soft, constant patter like a slow heartbeat keeping time with my own rising curiosity. I found myself drawn back again and again, fingers tracing the rough wood, the cold iron handle, the chipped paint around the edges. The lock was old, rusted, but not beyond my reach. With a quiet breath, I found a thin hairpin I'd picked up from the bathroom earlier, a flimsy tool against the stubborn lock. The sound of the rain filled the silence as I worked, the gentle clicks and scrapes echoing faintly in the hallway. Time seemed to slow, the world narrowing to the feel of the cold metal beneath my fingers and the soft resistance of the tumblers inside. And then, finally, a small give, a whisper of movement, and the lock released with a delicate, hollow click. I pushed the door open just a crack, a thin line of shadow stretching into the hallway's muted light. The air that slipped out was different, still and heavy, carrying the scent of something older, something folded away and untouched. With a slow, steady breath, I stepped inside. The room was perfectly still, like a forgotten corner paused in time. Dust floated lazily in the soft light that filtered through a small, curtained window. The floorboards creaked softly beneath my careful steps. Everything was neat and arranged as if waiting for someone to return, yet the air was thick with absence, the quiet of things left behind. Toys filled the room, scattered with a gentle care that spoke of long-past playtimes. I knelt by a small wooden train set, the paint faded and chipped, but still vivid in its colors. Dolls sat upright in a tiny rocking chair, their faces worn smooth from years of handling. None of it felt mine, or at least I couldn't remember it as mine. It was like stepping inside a dream I half remembered but could not fully place. My eyes were drawn to the bed, where a small stuffed fox lay nestled among faded quilts. The fabric was soft from years of being held and loved, the fox's embroidered eyes still glimmering with a strange, quiet life. I reached out and brushed a finger over its worn fur, feeling a delicate pulse of warmth, almost like a heartbeat. A whisper of comfort, or perhaps a faint warning. On the far wall hung a painting, its edges curling with age. The scene was of the very house I had returned to, the walls bathed in a cold winter light beneath a heavy blanket of snow. But beside the house stood a woman, her face clearer now than in the old photograph I had found, haunting and familiar in a way that unsettled me deeply. She looked right at me, eyes dark and steady, lips pressed as if holding back a secret. I stepped closer, the silence thickening around me, the room holding its breath. The woman's gaze seemed to pull at something inside me, drawing me deeper into the stillness. Then, softly, almost imperceptibly, I heard it, my name whispered without movement of lips, a sound that wasn't quite sound but a feeling, a breath on my skin. My name, the voice breathed, a thread of sound woven from the quiet and the shadows, pulling me toward the room's center, toward the space between the toys and the painting, toward a silence that felt both welcoming and terrible. I stood frozen, heart drumming gently in the stillness, the rain's steady rhythm outside a faint lullaby. The shadows seemed to press closer, the walls breathing slowly, the room alive with secrets waiting to unfold. I knew then that the locked door had not been just a barrier but a threshold, a gateway to memories buried in voices long silenced. As the whispered name faded, the room seemed to exhale softly, the presence lingering in the air like a sigh. I backed away slowly, the weight of the silence settling deep inside me. But I couldn't leave, couldn't turn away from what the room held, from the whisper that called me home into the unknown. The door creaked shut behind me, the lock clicking softly, as if the house itself was breathing along with me, keeping its secrets just out of reach. Outside, the rain continued, endless and patient, washing the world in quiet shadows. And inside me, the echo of that whispered name stayed, a gentle, haunting invitation into the dark. The quiet darkness in the room felt different somehow, not just the absence of light, but a kind of soft, enveloping stillness that settled around me like a gentle cloak. Sitting there among the scattered toys and faded quilts, the silence seemed to stretch and bend, filling every corner with a slow, steady breath. It was as if the house itself was breathing alongside me, exhaling memories I hadn't known I'd buried so deep. And then the memories came, slowly at first like distant ripples on a still pond, then growing clearer, stronger, more insistent. I lived here once in this very house with her, my sister. She had been my constant companion, my shadow in the sunlight, the whisper in my laughter. But she was gone now, lost long ago in the well behind the cottage, swallowed by the dark water one summer when the world was still young and full of possibility. The thought of her stirred something raw inside me, a quiet ache I hadn't realized was waiting beneath the surface. The rain outside mirrored the weight of that grief, tapping softly against the window panes like a slow, mournful heartbeat. It was as if the sky itself wept with me, shedding gentle tears to wash away the silence I'd kept so long. Sitting there among the relics of a childhood I'd almost forgotten, the worn fox, the chipped wooden train, the forgotten dolls, I felt the house pulse with a strange kind of life. It was as though every board and beam held pieces of her laughter, her tears, her breath. The walls remembered things I could no longer recall, stories that hung in the air like fragile threads waiting to be woven back into my heart. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and faded paper, a mixture that somehow carried the scent of both loss and comfort. I ran my fingers over the faded quilt on the bed, feeling the worn stitches beneath my touch. It was a fabric woven with time, with moments stitched carefully together, moments of joy and sorrow, of innocence and awakening. As the rain whispered against the windows, I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me, soft images of sunlit afternoons, of shared secrets whispered under the branches of the old oak tree, of hands clasped tightly in the quiet dark. I could almost hear her voice again, a faint echo carried on the breeze, a tender murmur calling me back to a time when everything was simple and whole. There was a gentle sorrow here, a sadness that wasn't sharp or violent but deep and enduring, like the slow turning of the seasons. And within that sorrow was something else, a quiet forgiveness, a sense of peace folded into the spaces between the memories. It was as if the house itself held that forgiveness, a silent guardian cradling the broken pieces of our shared past. I stayed there for a long time, letting the quiet settle around me like a balm. The steady rhythm of the rain became a lullaby, coaxing my heart to rest, to release the weight it had carried for so long. The house breathed with me, alive with the soft pulse of memory and loss, a sanctuary where grief could unfold gently and be held without fear. In that stillness, I felt a fragile connection stretching across the years, a thread that bound me to her and to this place, to the echoes that lingered in the walls and the shadows that danced just beyond the corner of my vision. It was a reminder that some losses never truly fade but remain with us, quiet and enduring, shaping who we are beneath the surface. As the night deepened and the rain softened to a whisper, I let myself drift on the edge of sleep, carried by the slow, steady heartbeat of the house. The memories lingered, soft and haunting, like a secret song sung just for me, a lullaby of loss and love, whispered gently into the dark. The night air had softened into a gentle drizzle, the rain no longer a relentless presence but a soft, almost tender murmur against the roof and windows. The world outside seemed to hold its breath, wrapped in a quiet calm that felt as fragile as a whispered secret. I moved slowly through the house, each step careful and deliberate, as if not to disturb the fragile peace settling between the walls. Opening the windows, I let the cool, fresh air drift inside, carrying with it the faint scent of earth and leaves washed clean by the rain. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze, casting soft, shifting shadows that danced like memories playing at the edges of sight. It was a quiet sort of magic, subtle and soothing, a gentle invitation to breathe and let go. I wandered through the rooms, touching the familiar surfaces, the worn wooden table, the faded rugs, the frames hanging slightly askew on the walls, and whispered good night to each one. Good night to the kitchen where so many meals had been shared and stories told. Good night to the hallway where shadows had once flickered like ghosts just beyond the edge of vision. Good night to the forgotten corners and silent spaces where memories still lingered, soft and unspoken. There was a warmth now, something gentle and healing nestled deep in the heart of the house. It felt as though the years of waiting, the long nights filled with quiet sorrow and half-remembered dreams, were finally folding into themselves, like the closing of a delicate flower at dusk. The house, once heavy with loss and silence, now breathed softly in the calm, a living thing at rest. I paused before the mirror in the hallway, the one I had covered in cloth to keep away the lingering reflections. Tonight, I left it uncovered, letting the faint moonlight catch its surface. For a moment, I thought I saw a gentle smile ripple across the glass, soft and fleeting, like a breeze brushing past a sleeping face. It was a quiet goodbye, a promise carried on the still air. As I settled into the bedroom, the last tendrils of the rain faded into the morning light. The gentle drip from the eaves slowed to a stop, leaving only the faintest echo of its presence. Outside, the world was hushed, wrapped in the soft glow of dawn that promised a new beginning. Lying back against the pillow, I felt the house hold me in its quiet embrace, steady and sure. The shadows that had once felt so heavy now seemed lighter, as if they too had been released from some unseen weight. The memories, the whispers, the soft echoes of a past long gone, they were all part of something greater, a cycle of rest and renewal that stretched beyond the walls.